Imagine discovering a machine so advanced it shouldn't exist. Not now, and certainly not 5,000 years ago. A world lit by oil lamps where wooden carts creaked through jungle paths and grand stone temples stood untouched. Yet, buried in ancient Sanskrit texts, some of the oldest documents known, lie passages so shockingly precise, so disturbingly mechanical, they read like engineering manuals. They describe Vimanas, airborne vessels capable of vertical lift, supersonic travel, invisibility, and even interplanetary journeys, complete with blueprints, components, and energy systems. These details appear in epic sources like the Mahabharata, Ramayana, and the arcane technical treatise Vimana Shastra. It's no vague myth. Claims include circular crafts, dome-shaped propulsion systems with mercury vortex engines, and thought or vibration-controlled interfaces. Some were described as roaring like thunder or hovering silently. Shockingly, passages describe weapons that scorch the earth with beams, leaving victims with symptoms akin to radiation sickness. And yet these texts predate nuclear science by millennia. If this were poetic allegory, why do they specify alloys, somaloha, tamagarbha, rohini, with exact densities, tensile strengths, heat tolerances, and conductivity? Why do temple carvings across Ellora, Khajuraho, and Hampi depict circular discs above mountain landscapes, beings inside, control panels, even mechanical levers? These aren't symbolic flourishes, they're architectural echoes. And all accounts align: rotor assemblies, mercury chambers, vibrational guidance, scattered across centuries, yet cohesive in detail. We're told these were built by rishis, philosopher-engineers fusing science and spirituality. They didn't sketch by quill. They channeled through meditation, mantra, trance. The Vimana Shastra surfaced in 1918 via Pandit Subbaraya Shastri, who said it was dictated in trance from Maharishi Bharadwaja. Skeptics dismiss it, but some passages align with modern NASA murmurings: mercury plasma vortices, electrogravitic lift, acoustic levitation. Fringe physicists talk these up, and black-budget researchers? Some claim to be investigating similar tech. Mainstream academia sidelines these texts, whitewashing them into spiritual allegory. But the evidence remains: diagrams, material lists, vibrational systems, cockpit carvings. So we must ask, who built these crafts? Divine beings, hybrid pilots, ancient engineers with lost knowledge? And if they existed, where did the technology go? Did it vanish? Or was it hidden? We're not speculating. We're decoding, tracing Vedic verses, temple art, covert military rumors, and forbidden archaeology to recover what may be humanity's lost blueprint. The Vimanas were astonishing machines, but who flew them? Ancient Indian texts don't describe ordinary pilots. They speak of devas, rishis, and asuras, beings of hybrid nature said to possess spiritual mastery and advanced cognitive control. These were not mere mortals. The Mahabharata details warriors who controlled Vimanas with their thoughts. Their minds weren't just trained, they were tuned, like instruments. Pilots didn't press buttons, they projected intention. These ships, it seems, responded not to fuel, but to frequency. Training wasn't technical, it was ritual. To fly, a pilot had to harmonize body, mind, and breath with elemental forces. Ancient texts mention control via mudras, mantras, and focused gaze. Spiritual training was as essential as any mechanical know-how. A distracted mind could cause a crash. This is echoed in the Samarangana Sutradhara, a medieval Indian text that instructs on constructing flying machines and warns: only those who master the 5 elements can safely operate a Vimana. These 5 elements, earth, water, fire, air, and ether, weren't just metaphysical. They represented specific forces a Vimana pilot had to balance. For example, air represented lift, fire propulsion, water thermal regulation, and ether the ship's spiritual core. Pilots practiced internal alchemy, fine-tuning their physiology to avoid destabilizing the craft. Their breath had to match the energy flow. Their vibration, their very emotion, could impact flight. This wasn't steering, it was energetic synchronization. Pilots were sometimes referred to as vidyadharas, bearers of knowledge. These were not just elite engineers. They were sages, high-vibration beings, perhaps even altered genetically, trained for interdimensional navigation. The Upanishads and Puranas describe them as luminous, glowing, capable of slipping between worlds. Were they avatars? Or were they a civilization apart? Perhaps remnants of an earlier, now lost epoch of human evolution? Were they what we would today call post-human? And not all pilots were aligned. Asuras, often painted as villains, flew Vimanas too. But their crafts were angular, sharp, weaponized. The texts imply they used the same technology, but without ethical restraint. Where the Devas practiced resonance and balance, the Asuras pushed for speed and firepower. Some texts say this imbalance led to aerial wars. The technology wasn't good or evil. It was a mirror, and each pilot's vibration dictated the machine's outcome. The sky once burned, not with lightning or firestorms, but with war. Ancient Indian epics describe air battles so vivid they resemble scenes from a sci-fi blockbuster. Vimanas zipped across the heavens, maneuvering at impossible angles, firing beams of energy that shattered the air. In the Mahabharata, the warrior Bhima launches a weapon as bright as 1,000 suns, vaporizing enemies in a single burst. Ash rained from the sky. Trees burned without flame. Animals dropped dead mid-run. Scholars call this symbolism, but look closer. Survivors lost hair and nails. Rivers turned black. Food became toxic. These aren't metaphors, they're symptoms, eerily similar to radiation exposure. Could we be reading not myth, but memory? Echoes of a forgotten nuclear age? The Vimanas weren't always peaceful. Some were armed, outfitted for stealth, destruction, and control. The battles were between Devas and Asuras, but the casualties were human. It wasn't just war, it was a reset. One Vedic story tells of a flying chariot launching a smoke-covered missile that created a mushroom cloud. Afterward, ash-coated cities. Survivors fled into caves. This sounds less like poetry and more like fallout. Other texts describe defensive shields, camouflage fields, and directional weaponry. One Vimana could become invisible. Another could divide into parts mid-air. This wasn't legend. This was advanced warfare, thousands of years ago. And the battlefield? Our own ancient Earth. But who started the war? And more importantly, why did it stop? Ancient law doesn't end in conquest. It ends in withdrawal. The Devas departed. The Asuras fell. The technology was sealed, the knowledge scattered. Vimanas vanished into stone, water, or sky. Some say they were buried in temples. Others say they were hidden in higher dimensions, phased out of sync with our reality. But one thing is clear. Their disappearance wasn't destruction. It was containment. Were we not ready? Did we misuse what was given? The texts suggest the war served as a warning that consciousness and technology must evolve together. That flight without ethics becomes annihilation. And so, the sky grew quiet, and Earth forgot, or tried to. But the memories live on, in temple murals, in strange ruins, in verses written in meter too precise for chance. The war ended, but the question still hangs. What if we remember too much? Beneath the stillness of India's ancient temples, something waits. Stone spires rise above jungles, but below, there are vaults, chambers sealed for millennia. In places like Ellora, Kailasa, and Padmanabhaswamy, rumors persist. Entire underground levels, off-limits, unexcavated, or too dangerous to open. What are they hiding? Some say relics, others say archives. But a few believe what's hidden below these temples isn't scripture, it's technology. Vast dormant vessels, Vimanas, resting in shadow. Take Kailasa Temple, carved from a single rock with impossible precision. It wasn't built. It was excavated downward, as if to bury something beneath. The engineering is still unexplainable. No scaffolding, no errors. Just an act of reverse construction so precise, it would challenge modern equipment. What if the temple isn't a monument, but a covering? A shell built to hide or honor what sleeps below. Like a hangar sealed in stone, disguised as worship. Then there's Padmanabhaswamy Temple, where 7 subterranean vaults exist. 6 have been opened. The 7th, sealed by ancient rituals guarded by legend. Locals say it contains divine power, or death. A radar scan in 2011 suggested metal behind the door, but opening it was deemed sacrilege. What if the reason is more practical? What if it contains machinery, or a still-active Vimana engine? Not metaphor. Machinery sealed behind mantra-locked doors for reasons we've forgotten. Similar patterns echo across Southeast Asia. Cambodia's Angkor Wat, with its astrological alignment and hidden shafts. Java's Borobudur, a temple shaped like a stupa, but structured like a launch pad. Sacred geometry, sonic resonance, underground vaults, and everywhere, restrictions. Areas walled off, stories half told. We're told it's about reverence, but what if it's about containment? Not of myth, but of memory. These places aren't just holy. They might be warehouses of dormant skycraft. Some whisper that governments already know. That scans have revealed cavities, signatures of metal and magnetism. That these temples aren't being preserved. They're being monitored. Because opening the wrong door might reactivate something ancient. Not a weapon, not exactly, but a ship with power we still don't understand, and so they remain sealed. Not because we lack keys, but because we haven't earned them. The question is no longer if they're real. It's who's willing to open them first. The Vedas speak of flying machines, but they don't stop at shapes and functions. They explain how they worked. One of the most repeated phrases in ancient Sanskrit texts is powered by mercury, not as a metaphor, but as a literal engine core. The Vaimanika Shastra describes rotating mercury vortex chambers, which create lift and thrust. Today, modern propulsion engineers see eerie similarities in plasma-based drives and ion thrusters. Was ancient India playing with high-frequency electromagnetic flight? In Sanskrit, these engines are called Rukma Vimanas, described as golden disc-shaped crafts. Their cores involved mercury heating systems inside closed chambers, generating pressure and magnetic lift. And beyond pressure, vibration. The texts speak of sound harmonics and mantras used to stabilize flight paths. Pilots didn't just navigate, they chanted. Words weren't commands, they were calibrations. Specific syllables caused specific effects. Imagine flight, not through mechanics, but mantra frequencies vibrating through the hull. It's not fantasy. Acoustic levitation is a field in real-world physics. Using carefully tuned sound waves, researchers have suspended droplets, moved small objects, and even counteracted gravity on microscales. What if ancient engineers scaled this up? One passage from the Samarangana Sutradhara claims a sound-based device could awaken the dormant wind within the hull. Could that be a metaphor? Or a vibrational system that excited the medium inside the ship, similar to how plasma behaves in vacuum chambers today? Then there's the link to sacred geometry. Temple structures were built to channel sound resonance, mandapas echo harmonics, tuned to specific notes. Some believe these weren't just places of worship, they were test chambers, sonic calibration rooms, allowing Vimanas to be fine-tuned to the Earth's frequencies. Vibration wasn't just propulsion, it was shielding, it was steering, it was fuel, which raises a haunting question. Did humanity once know how to bend matter with nothing but sound? And if these technologies existed, where did they go? Were they buried, dismantled, or simply too advanced to replicate? The mercury engines were volatile. The sound systems, highly sensitive. Maybe it all became too dangerous. Or maybe, just maybe, someone decided humanity wasn't ready. But buried in the Vaimanika Shastra are blueprints, elemental formulas, and vibrational codes. The document is still online. And if you've made it this far, don't just take my word. Look, the link's in the description. The ancient texts may have gone quiet, but the skies haven't. Over the last 80 years, reports have surfaced across India and beyond. Sightings of luminous disks, aerial objects maneuvering without sound, craft defying known physics. In 2012, Indian Air Force radars picked up unidentified aerial phenomena near the China border. The objects weren't balloons or drones. They appeared and vanished on command. But what shocked officials most wasn't their behavior. It was their shape, eerily familiar to ancient Vimanas. In 1991, a secretive research unit in Bangalore allegedly received funding to decode sections of the Vaimanika Shastra. Some claim prototypes were tested. Others say the data was quietly buried. But whistleblowers speak of propulsion systems involving mercury rings, acoustic dampeners, and crystalline stabilizers. Some of these theories match early Cold War experiments with electrogravitics, first explored by T. Townsend Brown, an American engineer whose notes also reference ancient Vedic diagrams. Coincidence or classified collaboration? Even NASA's former engineers have spoken up. Paul Laviolette, a systems theorist, once claimed that ancient texts contain technological blueprints written in metaphysical language. He wasn't dismissed. He was published. Military archives around the world show interest in anti-gravity tech linked to rotational fields and ionic displacement, terms found in both modern labs and ancient Sanskrit. We're told the ancients imagined myths, but what if they just spoke in symbols and we stopped listening? And then there are the ruins. In 2015, satellite imagery revealed strange geometrical structures beneath the sands of Rajasthan. Perfect circles, alignments, subterranean vaults. The Indian government dismissed them as natural, but researchers say otherwise. They believe some of these formations match the launch pads described in Vedic texts, especially in Agastya Samhita, which details energy production using saltwater, copper, and zinc. These aren't fantasy ingredients. They're the basis of primitive batteries. So the question isn't whether the Vimanas were real. It's how much of that reality was buried. By war, by secrecy, or by choice. Military secrecy is one thing, but spiritual suppression is another. If these crafts required consciousness to operate, then secrecy wasn't about protecting weapons. It was about protecting evolution. Perhaps this technology still exists, in pieces, in bunkers, or above our heads. And maybe the next step isn't invention, it's remembrance. India isn't alone in its tales of sky machines. The echoes of Vimanas reverberate across ancient cultures. In Sumer, they were called Anzu birds, beings who soared between worlds in fiery chariots. In Egypt, Thoth flew on a boat of millions of years. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl arrived in a feathered serpent craft. Different names, same descriptions: metallic flight, vertical lift, and beings descending from above, often to teach, sometimes to rule, always to disappear without a trace. What ties them all together is the detail. Not vague wings or storm metaphors, but technical consistency. These weren't primitive peoples imagining gods on clouds. They were civilizations describing encounters they couldn't fully explain, using the symbols they had. In Peru's Nazca lines, runways stretch for miles with no clear purpose, unless they were guidance systems. In Iraq, the Temple of Enki depicts beings using what look like control panels. In China, Han Dynasty scrolls speak of floating platforms and sky fortresses. Across the Pacific, the Aboriginal Australians tell of the Wandjina, white-skinned beings who came in sky boats, gave laws, and departed upward. Native American Hopi legends speak of Kachinas who traveled in flying shields. Even in Norse mythology, Odin's eight-legged horse, Sleipnir, moved through air and dimensions. When you strip away the cultural filters, the core elements remain: flight, frequency, and light-based propulsion. The Vimanas weren't isolated anomalies. They were part of a global phenomenon. And here's where it gets stranger. Many of these stories involve sound as a navigational tool, a weapon, or a way to summon the craft themselves. In Bali, rituals involve mantras that mimic the tonal frequencies said to awaken the gods. In Tibet, monks have long used overtone chants in conjunction with levitation rituals, stacking stones in impossible formations without physical tools. What if these weren't spiritual exercises, but residual training systems left behind by skyfaring ancestors? The implication is staggering. Earth may have once hosted a single, unified aerospace culture, now fragmented across myths. And the Vimanas were not unique. They were local models in a global network of forgotten flight. So, are these just coincidences? Or are they breadcrumbs, clues scattered across continents, waiting for someone to connect them? Not just archaeologists, but rememberers. Because these aren't just echoes of technology, they're signals, and someone, somewhere, might still be listening. By now we've looked at the shape, engines and wars of Vimanas, but the most confounding feature lies deeper. They didn't just fly through air, they flew through consciousness. Ancient texts say the Vimana's ultimate power source was not mercury, not sound, but mind. Pilots achieved flight not just through levers, but through inner harmony. Some texts even describe Vimanas as semi-sentient, responding to the pilot's intent, awareness, and vibration. This wasn't engineering, it was integration. In the Upanishads, we read of vehicles of light that respond to mental command. The craft aren't described as mechanical, but as extensions of will. The pilot's emotional state, clarity of mind, even breath pattern could affect trajectory. Think less aircraft and more neural interface, like an ancient version of mind-controlled drones. Except instead of joysticks, it was mantras. Instead of metal, it was frequency and light. And instead of learning to fly, you had to earn it. One passage in the Mahabharata describes a Vimana that moved with the thought of the rider, stopping where the heart wished, veering where the spirit turned. What if these weren't poetic metaphors? What if these are hints at quantum neuroflight? Consciousness altering localized fields, projecting through the ship, folding space. Not mechanically, but vibrationally. Modern researchers into consciousness-based tech believe intention can affect quantum systems. Ancient India may have built vessels from this principle, and this might explain why so few survived. The pilots weren't just operators, they were gatekeepers of vibration. If humanity became too emotionally unstable, too ego-driven, the crafts would be too dangerous to exist. One wrong intention could trigger disaster. So when the wars came, when Asuras twisted the tech, perhaps the Devas sealed it off. Not just the crafts, but the interface, the spiritual protocols, the mantras, the inner maps. Flight wasn't just grounded, it was forgotten. That's why so many legends link Vimanas to temples, gurus, and initiates, not mechanics. Because unlocking flight meant unlocking yourself. And perhaps that's the next step. Not rebuilding Vimanas with nuts and bolts, but reactivating them through awareness. If ancient ships were consciousness-driven, then remembering them isn't about archaeology. It's about alignment. The skies won't open with keys. They'll open with resonance. And when they do, the ships won't return. They'll reveal. What if the ancient blueprints of the Vimanas were never truly lost? Just hidden, scattered across temple scrolls, passed down in chants, encoded in geometry. But in the 20th century, something changed. In 1952, The Vaimanika Shastra surfaced in its full form, allegedly dictated in trance to Pandit Subbaraya Shastri. It contained over 300 pages of schematics, diagrams, propulsion methods, and anti-gravity principles. Mainstream scholars dismissed it as fantasy, but behind closed doors others weren't so sure. Reports began circulating of defense contractors and black-budget researchers quietly studying the text. In the 1970s, an Indian aeronautical team analyzed it and officially found inconsistencies, but some engineers noted concepts that eerily matched early tests in electrogravitics and plasma containment fields. The inconsistency wasn't the science, it was the language. Without the original vibration-based context, the systems made no sense, but translated through consciousness physics, they began to click. Meanwhile, across the ocean, Western agencies were also listening. Declassified CIA documents from the Cold War show a sudden spike in interest around Vedic and Tibetan manuscripts. Not for culture, for tech leads. Some papers reference non-Newtonian field propulsion, mentioned in obscure Eastern texts. Others suggest experiments based on sound lift principles mentioned in Sanskrit. At the same time, remote viewing projects were scanning temples, not for secrets of faith, but for access points to memory. One whistleblower from a black-budget program claimed a full reconstruction of a Vimana-like vessel was attempted in the early 2000s. The result? The ship powered on, but couldn't fly. Not because the parts failed, but because something was missing. The consciousness component, the vibrational interface, the emotional calibration. Without it, the ship destabilized. Modern tech could build the body, but not the soul. And so they shelved it, locked it in a vault, or maybe sent it back underground. So where are the blueprints now? Some say encrypted in Indian archives. Others believe they're split between spiritual orders, fragmented across temples to keep the tech from falling into the wrong hands. Maybe both. What's certain is this: the closer we get to recovering the Vimana design, the more the puzzle reveals itself. This isn't just engineering. It's legacy, hidden not to be erased, but to test us, to see if we're wise enough to rebuild it the right way. Why aren't we taught this in school? Why are Vimanas, some of the most detailed accounts of ancient technology, left out of every textbook? The answer may lie not in what's been lost, but in what's been deliberately buried. Colonial scholars dismissed the Vedic texts as allegorical, branding them mythology to preserve Western superiority. But after World War II, interest in these myths surged, not academically, but militarily. Suddenly, ancient Indian science became classified curiosity. In the 1960s, reports emerged of American and Soviet teams racing to access Sanskrit manuscripts. Some say entire libraries were photographed, digitized, and locked behind paywalls or government firewalls. In India, scholars researching Vimana texts faced mysterious funding cuts or were quietly reassigned. What were they hiding? Why did open study of these scriptures vanish overnight? Perhaps because they revealed not just flight, but a paradigm shift in energy, consciousness, and power. Even more curiously, some of the Vedic propulsion concepts resurfaced, not in science journals, but in classified patent filings by aerospace contractors. Mercury plasma loops, sonic pressure chambers, shielded propulsion coils. Engineers in the know will tell you, these aren't coincidences, they're reversed blueprints. And the deeper you dig, the more trails you find, leading to black ops budgets, think tanks, and labs hidden in deserts. But you won't find it on Google Scholar. You'll find it in silence. Yet, something is shifting. Independent researchers, digital archivists, and spiritual scholars are piecing it together. Sanskrit coders are feeding Vedic blueprints into AI. Monks are opening forbidden vaults. Shamans are finding cross-cultural matches in dreams and songlines. It's as if humanity is remembering all at once. And what was once locked away by colonizers, militaries, and fear is being unlocked by conscious curiosity. The cover-up is cracking. The reawakening has already begun. We're at a crossroads. The question now isn't whether Vimanas were real. It's whether we're ready for what they represent. Not flying saucers, but a reminder that human consciousness is the key. The ancient pilots weren't just travelers. They were bridges between worlds, between technology and soul. And now, as we decode their secrets, we face the same choice: replicate them mechanically or reawaken them within, because the skies are waiting, and so are the ships. Every ancient story ends the same way. The gods leave, the ships vanish, and humanity forgets. But what if that's not the end? What if it's intermission? Some ancient sources say the Vimanas were never destroyed, only withdrawn, hidden beyond our dimension, or phased into a frequency just out of reach. Not vanished, just veiled. The architects, as they're sometimes called, didn't abandon us. They went quiet, waiting, watching, until humanity remembered what flight really meant. The Vedic scriptures hint at cycles, yugas, where knowledge rises and falls. In each, a window opens, a chance to reawaken. According to some interpretations, this age, Kali Yuga, is nearing its end, which means the veil might soon lift, and signs of the architect's return aren't just spiritual, they're literal. All over the world, people report dreams of flying machines, downloads of schematics, spontaneous memories of ancient flight. These aren't fantasies, they're activations. In temples, symbols once seen as decoration are now revealing mathematical codes. Sound frequencies embedded in chants are being decoded into aerodynamic algorithms. Children speak languages they've never learned, draw blueprints with no prior training. Even scientists in fields like quantum cognition and neuroacoustics are beginning to accept a truth that would have been laughable decades ago. Consciousness might be inherently technological, a cosmic interface we're only now relearning to use. And if that's true, the return of the architects won't be a fleet descending from the clouds. It will be a shift, in vibration, in memory, in design. The architects may not reappear as glowing beings in golden ships. They might reawaken through us, through art, invention, instinct. And as we reassemble the pieces of the Vimana puzzle, through texts, carvings, frequencies, and dreams, we don't just build the craft, we become the interface. It's no longer about decoding diagrams, it's about decoding ourselves. Because the architects didn't give us technology, they seeded us with potential. And now that spark is reigniting. And if you're hearing this, if something inside you stirs when you look up at the stars or chant a word you don't fully understand, you're not just curious, you're remembering, and you're not alone, because the return of the architects is already underway. The ancient texts end abruptly. No closure, no aftermath, just a whisper, then silence. But silence, in the Vedic tradition, is never empty. It's a container, a broadcast, a signal still echoing through space and mind. And perhaps that's what the Vimanas truly left behind. Not just artifacts, not just engines, but a transmission, one that's still being picked up by those sensitive enough to hear, not through ears, but through instinct, dream, memory, you. And maybe, just maybe, the ancient seers knew this day would come, that one day fragments of forgotten tech would resurface, that blueprints once lost in fire would be redrawn in code, that seekers across the world would piece together geometry, vibration, and intention, slowly reconstructing what was never really gone. The Vimanas were never just ships. They were messages, warnings, invitations, testaments to a human potential waiting to reawaken. So where does it go from here? That's the question. Because the Vimanas may be part of our past, but they could also be the key to our future. If consciousness can steer matter, if vibration can shape energy, then what else are we capable of? What other technologies have we mislabeled as myth? What other truths are buried in chants and temple walls, waiting for us to remember? not as students, but as inheritors. And if this journey has stirred something in you, don't stop. The trail continues. In fact, it leads directly to the next revelation. Because if the Vimanas were sky machines, then what about the texts that claim to hold the actual architecture of reality? The frequencies behind creation itself? If you thought flying machines were impossible, wait until you explore the writings that claim to bend dimensions. The story doesn't end here. Up next, Emerald Tablets, Deep Dive, Lost Tablets, and Hidden Teachings. Click the link, because the sky was only the beginning. The real map was carved in stone. And if you're ready to decode more, the last key might be hidden in plain sight, like the Vaimanika Shastra, a text we've now referenced 3 times. The full version is linked in the description. No pressure, no pitch, just knowledge, waiting to be remembered. Next, we leave behind blueprints of flying craft and open a book not made of paper, but of emerald, inscribed by a god hidden beneath pyramids and whispered about in every secret society from Atlantis to the modern day. These tablets claim to unlock the very structure of reality. What if the real engines weren't machines, but words? And remember the Vaimanika Shastra? That ancient text is linked in the description. One set of instructions for flight, another for ascension,